Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. Got another Master Duel video for you. We're going to be doing another tier list. Our first tier list since the release of the Struggle in Wonderland selection pack. I like to do tier lists not right when a pack comes out, but actually a little bit later. That way we have a little bit of time to evaluate the meta, see how things are shaking out, and we can get a better idea of exactly where everything goes here. So, alright, I'm not going to waste any time. Let's get right on into it. And I think I might actually start this video off, not with, usually I just go in order of whatever the images are in, but I think I'll actually start this video off talking about Malice, because I don't think it's going to be a question to anybody that is, like, not just tier 1, but the best deck in the room, by far, and it's to a point where we have to question, is this actually a tier 0 deck? Now, if there is a tier 0 deck in the meta, I don't like adding the tier 0 to the tier list. I just leave it alone in tier 1 and then put everything else, you know, below it. Now, I've thought a lot about this, and I don't necessarily think that this is a tier 0 meta. Now, don't get me wrong. Malice is far and away the best deck in the room right now. I don't think a lot of people can question that. And I think to a lot of people, if there is one deck that is just the absolute best deck in the room, that makes it a tier 0 format, but that's a little bit of a loose definition. However, I will also say that some people will pull, to me, very arbitrary numbers, like, oh, if they're topping 65% or more of tournament top cuts, or it's like, oh, if it's representing at least 40% of the meta, which that later metric, I don't know how people at all measure that, considering, I don't know, anyway, but yeah, I don't really personally abide by any particular definition for tier 0. I don't go off statistics. I don't go off of necessarily, is this just the best deck in the room? To me, it's more of a matter of, like, is there, like, room to play anything else besides this in the meta, right? With Ishizu tier limits, we saw a format where, like, even if you were playing an anti-tier limit deck, it was just not enough. Like, tier limit was still probably just gonna walk all over you. I mean, obviously, if you opened Shifter against them, then that might not necessarily be the case, but there wasn't a deck that could consistently address tier limits issues. Like, we had people out here maining, like, non-fusion area, maining, like, all kinds of, like, anti-fusion or anti-graveyard techs, and it didn't stop tier limits from just, like, being, you know, more than 50% of what you saw on ladder, and far more than 50% of what you saw in tournament top cuts. Malice, we're not seeing that as much. Malice, I would compare more to Snake Eye when it first came into the game. Unhit, right? With 3 Ash, with 3 Poplar. Bonfire came in the next pack, but, you know, then with 3 Bonfire, so on and so forth. So that's where I think I would kind of put Malice's power level, and, like, somewhere in that neighborhood. And I'll say it again, I don't think we're in a tier 0 meta, but I do think that Malice is by far the best thing that you could be playing, and there's not too much question about that. Okay, now that we've got the big one out of the way, how does the rest of the meta look in comparison? Well, we'll start here with Cashier, which I think is still a rogue deck. To probably nobody's surprise, I've been putting Cashier on rogue for well over a year, maybe even over a year and a half at this point. Pretty much ever since it got all of its big limits, because pretty much ever since that time, it's just faced this two continuous issues of, 1, lack of consistency, and 2, just not really having that strong of an end ward. I know some people will hear that and scoff at me, like, a Rise Heart plus Era is broken, and it's like, it folds to any kind of negate or board breaking at all. You could even smashing ground a Rise Heart, and that works. So, yeah. I don't think that Cashier is that big of a threat at all. Blue Eyes, I definitely do still think is a tier 1 deck, and this is a lot of the reason why, or so at least some of the reason why I don't think Malice is tier 0. Like I said, if we're in a tier 0 format, then I would put Malice in, like, tier 1 by itself, and then everything else is the next best thing would be, like, upper tier 2. But I think that Blue Eyes, while not on the power level of Malice, can still challenge it pretty well, and also still does well enough against the rest of the meta to be definitely considered a tier 1 deck. Now, Memento, I'm also going to put in tier 1, and I'm actually going to put it above Primite Blue Eyes. That might look a little bit weird, but here's my rationale that I'm thinking, right? Okay, so Memento is a deck that, 1, doesn't care at all about any of the anti-malice hand trap techs going around, right? Doesn't care at all about the Lancia or the Chaos Hunter, but more than just that, the way that the hand trap meta has kind of shifted actually does favor Memento quite well. Now, Memento does have lines where it can play through stuff like Joel and Nib, but not having to worry about those things is very, very excellent. A lot of the time when I played Memento, I felt I would most often get stopped by like a Veiler or an Imperm on my normal summon Anguish or normal summon Darkblade or something, and those aren't being played nearly as much, which is pretty good. Yeah, just honestly, Memento, like I said, benefits from this hand trap meta. Also, another thing about Memento is that it plays pretty well, relatively speaking, going second into a Malice board compared to some other meta decks, because when you're going second with Memento, you don't really have to pull off a lot of like your, fancy combo stuff, right? All that you really have to do is summon the Combined Creation and the Creation King, with also the Akiran having been summoned at some point before to get the direct attacks in. So having a simplified going second game plan and being highly favored in the current hand trap meta, I think makes Memento a really, really solid pick right now. Potentially even better than Primite Blue Eyes. You could also do this, and I think this would also be fine. I actually think Memento and Primite Blue Eyes are pretty equal in power level right now, but I'm going to pull them like this because I think Memento plays pretty well going into this meta in general. And I might try more of it here in the near future. Alright, Makonko is up next. I'm going to put that in Rogue. It's about the same level as Cashier. I might put it a little bit above. Again, this is factoring in both the going second OTK builds as well as the going first Warrior Pile builds. I think they're both about upper Rogue level. Salamangreat, I think, is also upper Rogue level. Even above these two decks, though. Salad is a lot better than you might think it is. We saw that in the last year special, but also just in general, if you look at Untapped, still puts up a really, really, really solid win rate. Alright, Tenpai I'm going to put in tier 2, although it might end up a little bit higher in tier 2 than it has in the past, because Tenpai is pretty decently favored in the Malice meta. I mean, I don't know about favored, but I mean, it's really more that Tenpai just can play 3 Chaos Hunter and 3 Artifact Lancia very, very easily and not really care, if it sees those cards against non-Malice decks, because all they need is one Pydra or Shunjura Kaiman, you get it, So all they need is one of their cards to OTK, and then even if they open, Lancia or Chaos Hunter against non-Malice, they probably still opened at least one other hand trap or board breaker that is good against the deck they're playing against. So Tenpai, I do think, is a little more favored in this meta than it has been in the past. Hurley, I'm going to put in Rogue. I don't know if I'll put it above... Actually, I'll put it a little bit above Cashiera. I think these are pretty much the exact same power level, though. Because I think Pearly doesn't suffer from necessarily the same consistency... Well, it suffers from consistency issues, but not to the same degree necessarily that Cashiera does. Where Pearly suffers more is because Delicious Memory is still limited. Pearly has such a difficult time OTKing that it kind of has to play the control game a lot of the time, which in the past worked out for it. You could sit on Pearly Noir, or X-Pearly Noir, I think it's called, and then whatever hand traps you drew into or other face downs you set, and that would be enough to get you there. But in 2025 Yu-Gi-Oh, that's becoming less and less the case. But I think Pearly is still a really solid upper Rogue deck for sure. Alright, Yubel, I'm going to put in tier 2, but I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to put it above Tenpai or not. I think actually I might leave it below Tenpai. I could see myself changing my mind about this, and this is one of those positions where if you thought this was the case, I wouldn't disagree with you, but again, I think Tenpai being able to be so anti-specifically Malice when this is such a prevalent deck does give it a slight edge right now. Slight being the operative word in that. But Fiendsmith Yubel is still a very, very good deck, and if you're looking to just play a bunch of Fiendsmith cards plus negates, like if you're missing that itch from not playing Snake Eye anymore, although we'll talk about Snake Eye in a second, then Fiendsmith Yubel is definitely a solid deck to pick up, I think. White Forest, I'm going to continue to put in tier 3. Yeah, I just think it's a tier 3 deck. To me, White Forest, I think I might have made this comparison last time, but to me, White Forest is like the Monadium of 2025 Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Where the fact that it's like It is a synchro deck that can put up some really, really good boards, but is just more susceptible to hand traps than a lot of other decks in the meta. And I think that's more than anything what keeps White Forest at tier 3. If I remember right, I had a comment in the last tier list video that was like really questioning me putting White Forest in tier 3. And I mean, yeah, I get it. When the deck goes off, like when it gets its board off, it does not feel like a tier 3 deck. It feels much more powerful. But again, for me, what keeps it in tier 3 is how much more susceptible it is to hand traps than a lot of other decks that are placed above it. But if you wanted to put White Forest at the bottom of tier 2, I wouldn't fault you. I might even change my mind and do that later, but we'll keep it like that for now. Centurion is definitely a tier 3 deck, though. I don't think many people will argue against that. It's solid. It just hasn't really changed in what it does too much. I mean, the Primera Primus made the deck more consistent, but and actually did make the end board a little bit better too, which has helped it keep up with the meta, but not to the point where it's like, you know, one of the best things you could be playing. But I don't think people who are on Centurion are, you know, have any delusions of that. It's a solid tier 3 deck, which is still good. Still definitely good. I think, I usually mention this up top in the video, but I think it's worth reiterating that I think any one of these decks could reach Master 1 or top a tournament. Some in the Rogue category might require like more time or a more dedicated pilot than other decks, but I think all of these decks have a good opportunity to make it. Alright, next up is Sky Striker, which I'm going to put in Rogue. But I'll put it above Pearly and Kashtira. Still a very good control deck, I think. Alright, Fiendsmith Punk. I haven't really seen this deck much since... Well, there's a lot of decks I haven't really seen much since Malice came out, to be fair. Whether it's people who were on these decks wanting to try Malice because it's so strong and new, or feeling like there's kind of no point to trying to play into Malice, but I don't know. To be fair, Punk doesn't really get affected by the silver bullets. That's always the thing you got to think about with each of these decks, by the way, is how affected are they by... When I say the silver bullets, I mean Lancia and Chaos Hunter, the silver bullets against Malice. I think I had Punk in tier 2 last time. I think I might end up dropping it down to tier 3 now. I think it's on... Oh, no, that stays up there. I think it's about on par with White Forest, so I'm going to put it a little bit above because I think it does play it slightly better into hand traps. Actually, hang on, let me think about... I didn't really consider for White Forest and Centurion, how much do Lancia and Chaos Hunter affect them? I think Centurion actually does do some banishing, right? No, it doesn't. All the time. No, it just banishes Phalanx out of the graveyard, right? So you can't do that, which can affect your lines somewhat, but not, like, detrimentally. And White Force I don't think banishes at all, actually. Punk doesn't really banish at all either. Oh, no, you know what? It does for the Rising Scale. Then that's really important. I think that is actually enough to tip White Force to be a little bit better than Punk. I think these are pretty much the same power level, but again, you do have to consider how does this play into anti-banish hand traps in this meta. Tearlament is going to be a tier 3 deck. I'll put it... you know what? I think I'll actually put it above White Forest and Punk, because... Well, I guess to be fair, Tearlament, I was going to say, Tearlament loves the anti-banish hand traps, and generally speaking, that is true. There are still some scenarios where you do want to be able to banish stuff, though. I'm thinking mainly the Ishizu Shufflers, right? Those would be really nice to use against, like, Malice Whitebinder trying to activate its effect, for example. So that is actually a potential situation where, although to be fair, if Malice Whitebinder is activating its effect and you go to use a Ishizu Shuffler and they Lancia, then they can't they can't use the Malice Whitebinder effect anyway, so I guess that's fine. So yeah. I think I'll put Tearlaments here at the top of tier 3. I think that's a fine spot for now. You could maybe argue that way still better, but I'll leave it like this for the time being. Ritual Beast. Oh god. You know what? I think it's finally time for Ritual Beast to go down into Rogue. I might even put it like... I might even put it below Salads. There are other decks we'll talk about here in a second that are also like this, but Ritual Beast is just such an unfortunate stray of the Malice format. Catching strays from the Silver Bullet hand traps. I don't think I need to tell you how important banishing is for Ritual Beast as a deck, nor do I think in that respect I need to tell you exactly how good Lancia and Chaos Hunter are against Ritual Beast. so unfortunate that such a really solid expressive deck has to just take so many stray bullets from the Malice being legal here, or not just legal but so good. Ryuge, that is definitely going in Rogue. Probably somewhere in this neighborhood. I might even put Makonko a little bit above Ritual Beast right now. Like, do something like that. Yeah, that looks fine to me. Ryuge I didn't have on the last tier list, but I think it could have easily been worthy of a spot. And I think it's still a pretty solid Rogue deck. The thing that it had kind of going for it in the last meta was how good the continuous spell that banishes cards is. I guess that one is still fine against Malice, though, to be fair, because then if you're banishing all their stuff that's on the field, it can be revived off of like Splash Mage, Link Decoder gets banished. That's actually still decent if you're going first against Malice. Yeah, I'll keep it an upper Rogue, I think that's fine. Crystron! Okay, so this is another example like Ritual Beast of a deck that really catches strays from Lancia and Chaos Hunter being popular. Not to the same degree as Ritual Beast, to be fair. Like, it can definitely still make plays under those cards, but it doesn't fit. I think the main thing that Crystron still has going for it in a meta where Lancia and Chaos Hunter are seeing so much play is the fact that, like, normal summon Tristaros Pass is actually still a really good play. I don't know about really good, but it's still like a completely fine turn one, right? In conjunction with some hand traps in hand. Like, if I open a hand of Tristaros and 4 hand traps going first, I'm not thinking, oh dang, I can't combo. I'm thinking I have so many negates against my opponent here. Normal summon Tristaros Pass feels so good. So the big debate for me is, like, is this still a tier 1 deck? Am I going to put it here, or am I going to put it at the top of tier 2? Because the thing is, Crystron is still a really, really good deck, but I don't know. I think I'm going to put it in tier 1. I think it's that good. I think I'm going to leave it in tier 1, yeah. I do think that the way that the hand trap meta is playing out, that does make it a little bit worse than Memento and Blue Eyes, not by a ton, but by enough to be noticeable. But I'm gonna keep it here, I think. Okay. Next up we have Snake Eye. So Snake Eye, I'm actually gonna put in tier 3. And I think I might even put it above Centurion. No, I'll put it above 3. I think these are about the same power level. I think it's kind of debatable. I'll leave it here, actually. I think I'll leave it a bit above Centurion. So I put Snake Eye at the top of Rogue last time. I just kind of hedged and assumed that 1, not a lot of people would be on it, and 2, that it just wouldn't be that great compared to how it used to be. And while both of those things are true, the deck did still surprise me. Although, it's actually not that surprising, because I think back to when Tier Limits first got hit, right? And the exact same thing happened, where I was like, okay, without Merly, this is just a Rogue deck. An upper Rogue deck, still a very solid deck, but probably not going to see too much success. And then it immediately still started seeing a lot of tournament play and success, and even crept back up to upper tier 2 on my tier list at some point. So we can very easily see the same thing happen with Snake Eye. I know April, for example, just won Plushy Bell's Toy Box tournament with Snake Eye. I just saw her post a video about that. So, yeah, don't sleep on Snake Eye. It's still a very, very solid deck, for sure. And I think tier 3 is not a bad spot for it at all. I think tier 3... No, I'll put Giving Pup at the top of Rogue. That's where I've been putting it. It seems like a fine spot for it. I'm surprised Drytron is still as popular as it is. I never see this deck, but according to Untapped and just, like, you know, other sources, it's actually still being played a decent amount. But it does suffer, like, a lot of hand trap issues. It's funny how I called Cashier an upper Rogue deck and now it's at the bottom. But to be fair, I think these are all what I would consider to be upper Rogue decks, because there are a lot of decks that I don't even have on this list that are definitely still very, very solid in this meta too. Sprite, I gotta put in tier 3. I think I'll do this, actually. This looks good, yeah. I think Sprite is still a really solid deck. It feels the Silver Bullet hand traps a little bit more than some other decks in this meta, though, because of Ronin Tonin, right? You don't get to use your Swat Frog engine pretty much at all if they Lancia you, which is not that big of a deal. You can definitely still make boards. You just won't have as big of a board because you don't have access to quite as many bodies, but to be fair, there are also just some combo lines where the hand works out where you don't even go into Swap Frog on turn 1 and set up a perfectly fine board anyway, so yeah. I'll leave Sprite here. I think that's a fine spot for it. Hero, I'll put in Rogue around here. That seems a fine spot for it. Mimighoul is still seeing a lot of popularity. I think that's also a Rogue deck that I'll put somewhere in like the same neighborhood. Like here, I think that's fine. Voiceless is still a pretty solid tier 2 deck. I don't think it's affected by Lancia or Chaos Hunter, right? No, wait, it is, because... Don't you have to banish Saphira in order to do the Ritual Summon? I think even factoring that in, though, I think this is still a tier 2 deck, just in because of like sheer power level. Lab, I think, is in a similar spot. I'll put it in tier 2 just because of its adaptability and overall power level. Fiendsmith Control, I think, much like Tenpai, is actually pretty well positioned in this meta. The point where actually it might make it the second best tier 2 deck. Because much like Tenpai, you can play the Lancias and or Chaos Hunters, and you're not as affected by it as other decks, right? Because to the same notion as Tenpai can just have like one Pydra or something, for Fiendsmith Control, all you just need is like the one Engraver. Or honestly, there are a lot of games where you're playing Fiendsmith Control and you're just playing the control game using like only hand traps from your hand, right? Fiendsmith Control is like the epitome of like engine not deck, to the point where like sometimes you don't even need your engines or like your Fiendsmith engine, right? And the Bestials are a lot better against Malice than you might think. It's so easy to be like, oh, you know, Malice plays Bestials as extenders, so surely Bestials are pointless to play against Malice. Not true at all, actually. Bestials are really good against Splash Mage's target, whatever Splash Mage is trying to revive. Using a Bestial on that will stop a lot of their combo lines. And Link Decoder, using a Bestial on Link Decoder will also really screw up a lot of their lines. So I definitely think that the deck is a lot more well-positioned than it might seem in this metagame. Math Mech, I'll put like towards the top of Rogue. The second and third diameter just really did not change anything at all, honestly. Mermail Atlantean, I think, is still a tier 3 deck. I'm willing to put it above Snake Eye here. I think I had it in tier 2 last time, right? Which, yeah. Tier 3, I meant to say tier 2. Because I think Mermail Atlantean, let me see here. I think it's better than Punk and all this stuff. I think it's better than Snake Eye. I think it's better than White Forge. I think it's better than Tier. So I'll put it in tier 2. I think it's more well-positioned right now than Voiceless is. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Branded is obviously still a really, really solid deck right now. To the point where I'll actually just put it at the top of... See, okay. Last time I had Branded in tier 1. Okay, I think this is what I'm going to do. This feels right to me. Okay. Because I think Branded is still in a very, very good position in this meta just because of how flexible it is in terms of like any individual branded, any given branded game, you have a lot more autonomy and flexibility in what you can do than a lot of other decks in this meta. Just in general, period. Branded has always been a very, very, very flexible deck. That's why it's so difficult and skill expressive too. And again, I think that Crystron, while still very solid right now, is like... I think specifically right now, in this metagame, I'll put it at the top of tier 2. If the weeks go by and Lancia and Chaos Hunter just stop getting played nearly as often, then I could see a world where Crystron's back in tier 1. And I could see a world where people, you know, where I do this, right? And I think that's still fine. But I think for the time being, I'm going to leave Crystron at the top of tier 2. If you call it a tier 1 deck, I think that's perfectly reasonable, and I wouldn't even really argue against it necessarily. And finally, Exodia, which I'm just going to throw, like, here? Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So there we have it. There is my tier list for this meta. And as I mentioned before, while I do think Malice is just the best deck in the room, I think it's a significant bit better than these other 3 tier 1 decks. I don't think it's by enough of a margin to make Malice a tier 0 deck. Again, I think Malice is much like Snake Eye was when it first came out, and everything in it was at full power, right? It was unrestricted, everything was at 3, where it was by far the best deck in the room, but it was not quite the level of tier 0. So, okay, that's where I'm going to end off here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end. And even if you skip to the end just to see where I put everything, I'd still thank you for being interested enough to do so. Really, really appreciate your viewership, regardless of how long you watch. It really does mean a lot. The support does. But that's going to do it for now. Let's just move on to our outro. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end of the video, which by the way is one of the best ways to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, take a look at the names on screen. These are folks who have been so generous as to either join as a YouTube member or subscribe over on patreon.com/Hexlex to support. There's also perks for doing so. If you would like to see YouTube videos early, as well as some exclusive videos that get uploaded to YouTube, but for one reason or another I decide not to publish, definitely go ahead and hit that join button to see content early, as well as some exclusive content. If you're looking for more exclusive content, over on patreon.com, I upload exclusive videos that are not posted on YouTube just about every single day. Whether you choose to subscribe over on Patreon, join as a YouTube member, or simply continue to watch, your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much. But for now, this is Hexlex. I am signing out, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.